Jensen here. Today we are going to cook a minestrone soup. We're going to make some ham and Swiss sandwiches and some cranberry orange muffins. So we're going to start by getting our soup base ready, and then we're going to make our muffins. So we're going to put a little bit of olive oil into our oven, maybe about a tablespoon, just enough to kind of cover your bottom of it nicely. And then we're going to chop up yellow onion, and we are going to add it in there and let it start to caramelize. And then once it gets nice and caramelized, we'll throw in some bacon and Italian sausage. So we're just going to take off this whole outer layer that's just not very, it doesn't cook up well. It's a little chewy. And then we're going to do a simple dice on our onion here. So I'm going to cut them in half. I'm about divide it into 4 sections and just square it off. There we go. Give it a nice cut through. And this is a really simple dice. You don't want your pieces huge, just something that's nice and easy to manage on a spoon. And so we're going to get these sauteed up for our minestrone soup. And then we are going to work on our cranberry orange muffins using some of our sourdough discard. I'm going to give this a nice stir just to kind of coat all of the onions in some olive oil so that they will caramelize up nicely. There we go. And I'm going to have that over about a medium heat. Okay, let's start with our muffins here. So we're going to start with the wet base, and then we're going to add in our dry ingredients. So we are going to use a half a cup of melted butter, which is the same as 1 stick. I like to use salted because I always feel like salt in your baked goods just adds a little extra. And then we are going to add 3/4 cup of sour cream. And I'm just going to eyeball my sour cream here because it's such a pain to measure, but I kind of know what 3/4 looks like. And it's just a pretty good size scoop. We used like 3/4 last time when we were making our chocolate chip muffins. Once you've done it a couple of times, you know, but I always I have my measuring cup here, which you could also use as a good visual reference. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of sourdough starter discard. So while I was on my trip, we were in Miami and Fort Lauderdale for my daughter's soccer this weekend. We were gone for 4 days. I asked my husband to feed my starter while we were gone so it wouldn't go flat. So we're hoping it is all alive and happy. So we need a half a cup of sourdough starter. We're going to add this in. And then I'm just going to use my little silicone spatula here just to scrape off any extra. I'll put that guy away because we'll need to feed him so we can make some new bread soon. Let's give this a nice stir, and then we're going to add in some cream and our eggs next. So I'm just kind of mixing it up, mixing the butter into the discard as well as the sour cream.
You have a question on what sourdough starter?
A sourdough starter is what you use to make sourdough bread. It's what causes it to rise, and it is essentially like fermented flour and water. So you just add equal parts flour and water over about a week, leaving it out on your counter, and it naturally ferments itself, and it's what gives you that nice tart flavor in sourdough. It also makes the bread rise without using yeast, like added yeast. It just reacts with the natural yeast in flour. Okay, we've got our just kind of mixed up there. Give a nice little stir on our onions. They always start to smell delicious. And now we are going to add in a cup of, I just realized I need my measuring cup again, a 1/4 cup of cream for our cranberry orange muffins. Use 3/4 cup sour cream, and now we just need a 1/4 cup of regular cream. Our soup and our milk.
You have a question? Can you use yeast instead of sourdough?
Not for this recipe, but if you're making bread, yes, you can make a yeast bread if you want, but then it's a different type of bread. So it uses a whole different process. But yeah, those are kind of the two types of breads that you can make, is like a sourdough bread, which uses fermented flour, or yeast that you add in with the flour to cause it to rise. And then there's also, of course, quick breads where you use baking powder and baking soda. And they're all very different types of bread. But for this recipe, we're using sourdough starter. And it's a great way to get rid of some of your starter because you have to feed it to keep it alive. And we added in our cream. We're going to add in our 2 eggs.
The noise cancel on your mic now?
Oh, yes. I have second egg. So this is 2 eggs. Room temperature is best, but not essential. It just helps make the batter a little less cold going into the oven. And we're going to mix these in, making sure you break the yolks. And you want to do all of your mixing now, because when we do our mixing now, we will get, you won't get a stiff muffin. Once we add our flour in, we're going to get a stiff muffin. Let's see, why is that? And there we go. Okay. And now we're going to add in 1 teaspoon of vanilla. There we go. And then this is the part. We're going to add juice from a fresh juice it. Otherwise, the juice adds a little bit, but it doesn't give you enough. You got to add the orange zest in it. That's where you're going to get most of your flavor for this. Okay. And let's zest this guy up. We're going to add it here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going around and taking off this nice top layer of the orange. And of course I dropped my orange in there. Always happens. Accidents happen. Let's just give this a wash. Gotta hold on to it tight. They're pretty slippery. No. You want both? Okay. We're gonna try it. We're having some no sound right now. There we go. Let's see. We're gonna try to work on it. Let's try to speak loud if that's coming through. Until it's nice. And we've got all of it off. I think we've got one going up now. So we got some new mics and we're seeing how they work out. But you never know. Sometimes it's always good to stick with the original technology. But okay, we've got ours zesting up. We've almost got it all zested. Perfect. I'm going to give my onions a nice stir. They're starting to get caramelized. Perfect. Turn them down just a smidge. And now we are going to add the juice of our orange in there. So we have the zest of 1 whole orange, and now we're going to juice it. So I'm just going to cut it in half. Pull out any big C's I'd see right away, and we're just going to use my little juicer here, and we're going to put it in here. And fresh orange juice is the best. I mean, in a pinch, you could use regular orange juice, but the thing is you still need kind of orange zest for this recipe, so you got to really just use fresh oranges. There we go. So we've got 1 whole one. Now we need our second one, and you can see it's just absolutely beautiful. Adds a nice bright orange color to it, and this will give a lovely flavor. Perfect. Squeeze it out. And then there was 1 seed in that whole orange, so I'm going to just pull it out. Perfect. And we're going to give this a good mix in. So we've got our fresh orange juice in there, our orange zest, and now we're going to add our dry ingredients. We'll put our cranberries in last. We'll fold those in at the very end, but we're going to add in our dry ingredients now. So we are going to give my onions a nice stir. They're perfect. They're just almost there to caramelization, which is perfect. We're waiting for them to get all nice and brown, which gives us plenty of time to get this stuff done. So we're going to use 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then we're going to use a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. So you want to use more baking powder than baking soda, because if you do it the opposite way, your muffins will puff up really big and they'll have a bitter taste. Get a little bit. There we go. And now we're going to use a ½ teaspoon of baking soda. Perfect. And then we're going to add in a teaspoon of salt. And I will say, you got to add the salt for the baking goods. It's a flavor enhancer. It really brings it out. You can cut it down a little bit if you want, but it makes a difference. Okay, we're going to stir this in and mix it up, because again, we can mix it well until we add the flour in. Once we add the flour in, we don't want to over mix it. Otherwise, it will turn into a really stiff muffin, and you don't want a stiff muffin. Let's see. I want to make sure I got a little baking powder on here, so I just want to make sure that gets all the way mixed in. There we go. Okay, now we are going to add in 1 cup of granulated sugar. And this is where our sweetness is going to come in with our muffin. So we've got 1 cup.
Yeah, someone mentioned that they've been missing the dinner one recently.
Yes, so I have been out of town. My daughter had some soccer games in Miami and Fort Lauderdale this weekend. So we flew down there Thursday night or Thursday afternoon. And we were supposed to get back yesterday afternoon, but there was some crazy weather. And we didn't get back in until 2:30 in the morning. And we were some of the lucky ones on my daughter's team. Only 1 other person made it in last night. The rest got stranded in Atlanta, or they didn't make it out of Miami or Fort Lauderdale. It was crazy. We luckily made it in after 12 hours of delay. But we were out of town. We had a lot of fun. Ate a lot of great seafood in Miami and Fort Lauderdale. So it was delicious. Now we're going to add in 2 cups of all-purpose flour. And you want to use all-purpose. You don't want to use bread flour, and you don't want to use self-rising flour. So just your good old all-purpose. And we want 2 cups. Now this is where you don't want to overmix. If you overmix, and it's a common mistake because most people think you need a smooth batter. You want a lumpy, chunky batter. Chunky is better. And it keeps your muffins being light and fluffy. If you overmix it, you're going to have a really stiff, hard muffin. It's the same thing with like pancake batters and stuff like that. You just don't want to overmix. So I'm just going to stir it in until it is just barely mixed, where the flour, you're still going to see a little bit of flour, but not a lot. And I will say, I know it's counterintuitive to what you feel like you need to do, but leave it chunky, leave it lumpy. It will lead for a much better product. There we go. So you can still see I have a little bit of flour on there, but we're going to be folding in our cranberries now, and that will get the rest of it. But you want to keep it perfect and nice. And now we're going to add about, I want to say, a ½ cup of dried cranberries. I am just going to eyeball them in my hand, but it is about a ½ cup. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure none of them are kind of broken together. So I'm just going to really like sprinkle them over. Cranberries have a lot of flavor, and so a little goes a long way. Now you can always increase it, but I find that it kind of messes with the texture of the muffin. There we go. And then I'm just going to gently fold the rest of these in. And if you wanted to use fresh cranberries, what you'd want to do first is kind of cook them up with a little bit of sugar and a little bit of lemon juice or orange juice to kind of soften them up first before baking with them. So now we're just kind of folding them in, which is kind of scooping over and like dropping it on top of each other itself if you don't know what folding in is. There we go. And so here we've got this nice chunky batter, and it is ready to go into our muffin tins. We give our onions a nice little stir. They're almost perfectly caramelized. And you've got to do it with our soups. Caramelizing is important because it brings out the natural sugar and onions and the flavor, and they have to be done by itself because once you add something into your pot with the onions, they no longer like to caramelize up. The heat is like taken from the others, like they cook the other things, so no longer works. We're going to put in our muffin liners. These muffin liners got a little smooshed, but they'll work just fine. And now I'm going to I prefer to scoop my stuff in using a metal spoon because it just drops in nicer. And now this is our cranberry orange muffin batter. It is thicker than most muffin batters because I like to use melted butter instead of oil. I think it gives a much nicer, richer baked good than oil does. So if you use oil, which you can substitute, you'll have a bit more of a runny batter. But we're going to fill these up. I'm going to go back over and refill them on each one, but we're starting out with a scoop in each one, and then we'll top them off. This makes about a dozen filled to the top muffins, but you can also stretch it, and you could probably make a dozen and a half by filling them 3/4 of the way. But I do like my muffins to have a really nice dome on them, so I fill them up, of course, to the top of the liner. Gives you just that nice bakery-esque feel. There. And now I'm going to kind of go back around and fill them up with the rest of my batter. And I will say, this is one where you kind of got to get your finger in it because it is a thicker batter and it just helps. It's much easier.
You have a question. Could you make cookies with this batter?
It would not turn out as well. Now you could drop them on and they could kind of be like a really puffy muffin top type thing, but there's not enough. Cookies need a higher fat ratio and they need a less liquid ratio. So you would have to cut out the sour cream in it, and you'd have to double the butter because cookies typically have a lot more butter or oil in it. So you could do it. It wouldn't be like a cookie. It would be more like a muffin top for it. So we're just going to go through, fill up the rest of these, and then these guys are going to go into the oven. Now, I have made a scone with these, I've done cranberry orange scones, which are delicious and give you more of a cookie feel. And I've done that before. But today we're making the cranberry orange muffins that will go with our minestrone soup. And then we're going to do some ham and Swiss melts for lunch using up some of the sourdough I baked right before we left. Okay, we have got our muffin tin filled up. They're all to the top, which is perfect.
You have a question? Could you use blueberries instead?
You could definitely use blueberries. You could make them a blueberry muffin. I kind of make the same base for most of my muffins. This one's cranberry orange, but you could sub out cranberries and do blueberries and give it an orange blueberry muffin. It would be delicious. But the base that I use for this muffin is like the base that I use for a lot of my muffins, and I just add in different like inclusions to have like different flavors. But I do have a lovely blueberry muffin on and a blueberry lime or a lemon one. So I'm putting them on my top rack there, and I have it at 400, and we're going to bake it for 18 minutes. So 18 minutes at 400 degrees. You want a little hotter temperature, give you that nice big dome and a little bit of a nice golden top to it. You also want them on higher up for it. Now we are done making our muffins. Let's get on to our soup and then our melt. So as you can see, our onions have caramelized up beautifully. They've got a nice golden brown tinge to it. We are going to add in some Italian sausage. And this is about a half a pound of Italian sausage. And I'm going to break it up using my spatula. And we're going to turn up the heat just a little bit. So now I had it down to about a 3 while I was caramelizing them. Always few who jump out. We're going to move it up to about a 6. We've got a little bit of, we got our Italian sausage in there. And then we're going to add a few pieces of bacon just to give that nice, really rich flavor that goes really well with the Italian sausage. And I'm going to say we're going to start maybe with, I think we're just going to use 3 good-sized pieces of bacon. It's really for the flavor of the broth. It gives it a nice, rich broth. So we'll put it back here, save this for another day. And I'm just using some kitchen shears, and I'm going to trim it up. So I got about 4 pieces here, it looks like. And I'm just going to use this to cut it up in there. I will say, if you don't have a good set of kitchen scissors or kitchen shears, invest in them. I love using my kitchen shears for like everything, especially with my little kids. I use it to cut up their food all the time because I find it's much easier to cut them up with kitchen shears than it is with a knife. So love it. Invest in a good pair because you want a little heft behind them. Okay, so we've got these all just about cut up. Perfect. And now we're going to give this a nice stir. And this is my bacony hand, so we're going to give it a wash in just a second. I always like to just keep one hand dirty and one hand clean when I'm cooking. Okay, I'm going to give my hands a quick rinse. Get all this bacon off. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so we're sauteing up our bacon and our Italian sausage for our minestrone soup. I'm just going to be smashing it up a little bit with my spatula to break it up and let it cook up. Perfect. There you go, because you don't want any huge chunks of sausage in your soup because you got to be able to eat it with a spoon. Okay, now we're going to add in about 1.5 teaspoons of Italian seasoning. This is Mrs. Dash's Italian medley, but it is just a regular like Italian seasoning. So you want about 1.5 teaspoons. This is going to give, I like to cook it up with my meat now because it will tenderize those spices and then it's going to really meld well into the broth. So give it a nice stir. And again, I always like to cook my spices up with a little bit of fat because that really brings out the flavor. So we're going to add in some ground black pepper, about 1/2 teaspoon. You don't need much. Just going to give it a nice little sprinkle around. And you could always add more. And if you are a fan of spicy foods, you could do a little red pepper as well, or cayenne pepper. There we go. We've got our sausages almost nice and browned up. So I'm going to turn it down to about a 5 now. And while this is cooking up, we are going to dice up our celery. So I have about 6 stalks here. Now these are not full stalks. If I had the full stalks with the leaves, definitely keep the leaves on and chop those up. They add a delicious flavor as well as a lovely pop of green. Since these were already pre-cut and pre-washed, I always chop off the ends because they get a little bit dehydrated and therefore a little bit chewy in texture. And then I'm just going to go down and I'm going to slice each one in half, long way. And that's just so I don't have a massive piece of celery in my soup. I kind of want little smaller bits of noodles, or not noodles, of celery and vegetables. We're using small noodles too. But you want smaller bits so that you can have multiple vegetables and stuff on every bite. So you're getting it all. And we're just going to do, kind of dice them up. There we go. And then we're going to just throw these in with our sausage and our bacon that is cooking up. So we already have our onions in there and some 4 pieces of bacon and about a half a pound of Italian sausage. And we're going to give this a nice stir and let it help season the meat as well. Celery, I find a lot of people don't like celery, but it does add a delicious flavor to the broth that you just can't recreate. It's one of those layers that you really need. Okay. We've got 4 carrots here. This is really like equal to 2 big ones or 3 medium ones. We were down slim pickings. We were almost out of all of it, but I was out of town the last couple of days, so haven't gone shopping yet. So we're using up. And now, got to go tomorrow. There we go. So we're going to give a nice peel on these because if you, in theory, yes, you can leave that skin on, but it just doesn't have a good texture and it has a more earthy flavor to it. So I always peel mine off. It makes for a much better finished product, much better taste on the carrots as well. And you could always use pre-washed baby cut carrots as well, or you can even get those cut carrots that you could throw in here. Okay. And just going to top off the ends on both sides because they're just not as nice in texture. And then we're just going to do kind of a thin slice on these. Nothing too big because carrots are one of the vegetables in this soup that is going to take the longest to cook. So you don't want them huge, otherwise you'll have more stiff carrots in your minestrone than you would if you were to cut them up smaller. So we've got our carrots. Nice. There we go. Just get them all about even. And then we're going to toss these in as well with our celery, our Italian sausage, bacon, and onions. Kind of making our vegetable base for our minestrone. Let's give it a nice stir. Beautiful. Smells lovely. And then we're going to add in some minced garlic. If you wanted to use fresh garlic, it'd be about 2 to 3 cloves. So I'm just going to add in about a teaspoon of minced garlic. Grab a little bit that fell here. So give it a nice little burst of flavor along with the celery and the onion. They're all kind of in that same family. Okay, perfect. Beautiful. So my last of my vegetables that I have are zucchini, which I'm going to add after we have our broth going. And then I have some herbs and some green onions. Those are all going to be on the second part. These vegetables, they're firmer ones and they taste much better in stews and soup when you have sauteed them up first. So now we're going to start making our broth component. So I'm going to use a can of just diced tomatoes. You could also use about 3 to 4 diced fresh tomatoes if you wanted to. That would work well. But we're going to add this in here with all of the juices because that's going to add just a nice body to our broth and our minestrone as well. There we go. I'm going to give it a nice stir. Perfect. And then we're going to add 4 cups of water and a big heaping spoonful of chicken bouillon. You could also use chicken broth if you wanted, but I find you get a little bit more chicken flavor using the bouillon and a bit more, you don't have to add extra salt. With chicken broth, I find a lot of times chicken broth is just very mild in flavor. It's really diluted. And so I like to use the bouillon with water because it gives you a much richer flavor and stuff, especially when you're doing like a quick stew, like a quick soup. I like to try to make a soup in 30 minutes or less. Now, if you're making your own broth with chicken and stuff like that, that's a little bit different. But for a quick, way, I like to use this stuff. It's great. You can also use like the cube ones, but you just want 1 big heaping spoonful. And then we'll mix it in there. And this is going to also add like the saltiness to your soup, but in a really great way, in a chickeny way. We're going to stir this in. I'm just going to make sure I get all that bouillon off of my spoon. Now we're going to let this kind of come to a nice simmer. Once it comes to a simmer, we're going to add in some pasta. But we want our broth to come to a boil first because you want to add it into hot water, just like if you were cooking pasta regularly. Okay, while this is coming to a simmer, we are going to make our melts that we're going to have with it. So I'm just going to clear a little of this out of the way for things. We might use that in just a second. And I'm going to wipe this up, and then we're going to get onto our ham and Swiss melts, which we will serve with our minestrone. And right now we have our cranberry orange muffins, which is what I'm cleaning up, baking in the oven, that we used a bit of our sourdough discard with. Okay, so just a little simple cleanup. And now we're going to use, I made up some breads right before I left out of town. I made a pesto basil bread, and then we have some sourdough. They're both sourdough, but just basic sourdough. Okay, so for me, I'm going to use my pesto basil bread, which is absolutely delicious. But you can see the fresh basil in it, and it smells absolutely delicious. So I'm going to use that for my sandwich today. I'm going to cut 2 slices of this one. And you don't want to cut your bread too thick because you want to be able to heat up all the way through. So I always say, this is about like the perfect thickness because you can cook all the way through, but it won't prevent it from melting. And then we're going to use just our basic sourdough. And we're going to cut off 2 nice slices of this one. That's what I always say. I love sourdough because it makes the best grilled cheeses or melts to use for the next day. So whenever we have extra sourdough, it's like perfect. It just depends. Depends who's here for dinner. If my parents are here for dinner, there's never any extra bread because they absolutely love it. Okay, we're going to spread a little bit of room temperature butter on each side, or on one side of each slice of bread. Put it face down on the skillet. This is what's going to kind of cook up and crisp up on there, give you that nice grilled cheese crispy crust on it, you know, the golden brown. So room temperature butter works the best for this. So I always like to keep a stick of butter out on the counter. There we go. Put this guy down. One little bit more. And a little butter goes a long way. So you don't need a tremendous amount, but I prefer to butter the bread than the skillet because it will just burn on the skillet. And now we are going to assemble our sandwiches, and we're just doing a basic ham and Swiss. These always remind me of the ones that you can get, like the ham and Swiss on baguette that you get from Starbucks. So we're going to use a little bit of Grey Poupon. Got to have your fancy bougie mustard. You want a Dijon, not a yellow mustard. So a Dijon or a seedy one is best. And we're just going to put a little bit on each one. You don't need a lot. But I will say it works well because it cuts up the sweetness of ham. I'm getting down. I need to get another one. So you want just enough to have a nice little thin smear on it. I personally don't like mustard, but I do like it on certain things. And this is one where you just have a smattering.
You have a question? How was your trip?
Was wonderful. It was nice. The weather wasn't as cooperative as we had hoped. We had gone to the beach one day and they were flying a purple flag and a red flag. And the purple flag is for dangerous marine life, and the red flag is for just dangerous waves. It was really windy. But we got to walk along the beach, and we ate at some amazing restaurants. I had my fill of seafood, which I love. But it was great. It was a nice break. And my daughter, she played well. She They unfortunately lost all of their games, but she did play up 2 years for one of her games, but she did awesome with it. But it was a fun trip. I got to see my brother because he lives in Fort Lauderdale, so it was a good trip. Lots of fun. I even got sunburned, even though it was cloudy and it poured during the game. I got sunburned, and I'm like, how could I possibly have gotten sunburned? There was no sun. There were also, if you've never been there, they're like native peacocks everywhere. So we're like driving to the soccer fields, and you just see like peacocks everywhere in people's neighborhoods, just like in people's yards, on their fences. It was really cool because I didn't realize that peacocks were native to Florida. It's just never learned that, but it was pretty cool. So we did our thin layer of Swiss. Now we did our thin layer of ham. This is just smoked ham, or you could do a honey ham, just whatever sandwich ham you want. And now we're going to finish up with a little bit of Swiss. If I need to stretch it, because I only have this much left, we'll use a little bit of mozzarella. You just want a very mild white cheese to go on your ham and Swisses. But I think...
You have a question. Do you ever just do a sourdough bread baking day? They're a beginner and would love to pick up some tips.
So I actually have a couple videos posted on how you can make your sourdough and how to make a sourdough loaf from start to beginning. I have the videos posted on the link on our page. I typically, when I make sourdoughs, I like to make 2 at a time. And then I make them during I start during lunch, and then I finish part of it during dinner when I stream, because there is no start to finish getting your sourdough in like one day. Now, there are some one-day recipes, but if you don't have a starter yet, that's going to be about a week before you can make your first loaf of bread, because it takes about a week for your flour to ferment enough to allow it to rise up to make a good crumb on your bread. I'm going to turn my skillet up to about a medium high, and we're going to start cooking our melts. Now we're going to work on our soup. You can see we have a nice kind of rolling bubble on it, which is what we want to add in our pasta. So I am using just a little bit. They're just some good old shells. You could use any type. I think traditional for minestrone was like the macaroni noodles, but I never buy macaroni noodles. You don't want too many. About a half a cup of noodles do well, because they actually soak up a lot of broth and they get a lot bigger. So I don't add too many in there, just about a half a cup. But we got these in here, but my muffins are beeping. So before we finish up the next step, let's go grab our muffins out of the oven. And again, these are my sourdough discard muffins, which there's my two cat paws. So these are cranberry orange using some sourdough discard. And let me see, I always say, you know they're done when you can touch the top and your finger doesn't sink in. But look how beautiful these are. This was made with our fresh orange juice, orange zest. Let me turn off my oven, and cranberries. And then our sourdough discard. Because if you're going to do making sourdough bread, you've got to feed your starter. And by feeding your starter, you have to discard half of your feed, or your half of your starter every day to feed it up. But again, these were our sourdough discard cranberry orange muffins that we used fresh orange juice, orange zest, and cranberries. And they're going to be absolutely delicious. Okay, we've got a big rolling bubble on our soup right now, so let me give it a nice stir. And we're going to add in the rest of our vegetables and then our kidney beans. So I do have 1 zucchini here. We are going to cut the ends off, and then I'm going to quarter it by cutting it in half, and then half again, and then we'll slice it up, because you don't want huge pieces of zucchini in your soup. Zucchini is lovely in soups because it acts like a sponge. It's a very porous vegetable, and it just soaks up all the delicious flavors in the broth. And it just really takes on any flavor that you have. And so we have a nice kind of mellow Italian flavor to our broth, basic kind of minestrone. as long with the onions and the celery and whatnot. But we're also going to add some nice fresh herbs, which will really brighten it up. So we're going to stir in our zucchini. We're going to give it a nice stir. We want to make sure all of that zucchini gets tucked underneath the broth so it can really start to soak in up those flavors. There we go. Perfect. And I have it now on, I want it on a slight simmer. I don't want it on a super high boil, so a slight simmer. So we have it over about a 4.5 of 5. Okay. Next, we're going to add in some kidney beans. If you've never worked with canned beans and adding them into a soup, you have to wash them first because they are in a really starchy liquid, which will just ruin the texture of your soup and flavors. So make sure you have like a colander or something like this. And I just pour all my beans out. And then you just need to give them a quick rinse to get that starchy water off, because it doesn't add any flavor or any health benefit, but it will ruin your soup. Now, if you want to be like really eco and try to like not waste anything, there are several recipes that you can use that starchy bean paste with, because it can actually mimic like an egg in a recipe. So we're going to stir in our can of kidney beans. These are dark ones, but you could also use light red, and you could even use cannelli beans, which are kind of like white kidney beans. So there's lots of different options of beans you can use. And if you don't like beans, you can completely omit them as well. But I find that this is a great way to do beans without having to fully commit to it, because you just get a small amount in every bite. It's not like overpowering. Okay, let's check, see if they're ready for our first flip. Okay, we got our butter melted. So we do our kind of first flip through is to melt the butter and warm up the bread. And then my second cooking on each side is to give it that nice golden brown crust. This is to make sure that the cheese melts up.
You have a question? What part of Iowa are you from?
I'm from Ames, Iowa. So from where Iowa State is, if you're familiar with it. And my husband is actually from Bettendorf, or like the Quad Cities. So we're kind of like all over Iowa.
Actually, Birmingham.
Well, my husband originally is from Birmingham, but when he was a teen, he moved to Iowa, or to Bettendorf. So I never knew him before that, but that's where, when we would visit his family and everything. What's really strange about it is, and I don't know if it's just because you're so like in tune to it, but I feel like I meet people from Iowa all the time, everywhere. Even it's like my daughter's soccer team. There were like 4 other people on there from Iowa as well. One of them who actually grew up in the same town as my husband. So it's just like such a small world sometimes. Okay, this is, we had about a couple, I want to say maybe this will be about a tablespoon and a half of fresh basil. And we're going to mince it up nicely. We're going to add it in right towards the end so it has that really fresh pop on our broth.
2 things. Sherry, we do answer pertinent questions. We're on multiple streams at the same time. And then you have a question, who's the cameraman?
The cameraman is my husband. I know how much he enjoys it for me. I just don't think I could do this if I had to set up a stand. I like things to be more natural. I kind of started doing this not too long ago on a whim, and I've been really enjoying it. And he's been, helping me out through it. He's learned a lot about cooking because he didn't know very much about it beforehand. But it's kind of fun. But yes, he's there holding it. His hands get a bit tired when I do a long stream. But he is also the one who kind of reads off the comments for me and keeps me updated on people's questions as best, as we can, and want to make sure the flow of everything still goes. Okay, so this next herb that I'm cutting up is some fresh parsley, and I'm just making sure I take off any of the stems because you don't want those in your soup. They're just going to add a chewy texture. And so you just want the leaves. And unfortunately, there's really no good way to de-leaf your herbs than by just picking them with your hands. I've like tried they make those things where you can thread the thing through and it pulls off the leaf. Well, that's like more work than just to pull them off. And again, I'm going to use about maybe a fourth a cup of fresh parsley. And again, this is going to add not only a beautiful color and pop, but a really fresh brightness to the stew, to the broth, which will be lovely.
Based on all the comments, I feel like half the population of Iowa is here.
Yes, you know what? That's because Iowa is a great place. You know, it is, and especially to raise a family. I feel like there's just a good community and a homebody there in Iowa. I mean, I love where we live now, but I think maybe I'm impartial to it because I lived there for a while and then I went back to college there. But I always had such fond memories, except when I got older and had to deal with the snow by myself. When I was a kid and the snow was magical. When I went back from college and I had to dig my car out every day, not so wonderful.
You have a question? Are your recipes posted?
I do post the cards when I get them made, which can take a hot minute, but we always try to post the videos from our live streams on the link on our page so that everybody can always rewatch them and make them along from there. I do try to go through every ingredient that I'm using. But yes, I try to get the recipe cards out, but the quickest way, if you want to remake it, is to just, I guess, find the video. Well, it takes us a couple hours to get them posted, but typically we get them up there pretty fast. Okay, let's see if ours is ready for the next set of flipping. Perfect. And now that our skillet is a lot warmer, I'm going to turn it down again to about a 3. And now we're going to kind of get that really nice golden brown crisping on each side. Okay, so we've got our fresh basil minced up. We've got our fresh parsley minced up. And now we're going to add in or mince up some green onions for our minestrone soup. And this is just going to go just lovely. And for me, I'm a soup and sandwich girl. So I've got to have, we're making some ham and Swiss melts because I love to dip my sandwich into my soup broth. Just delicious. Okay, so I've got 3 pretty good sized green onions. It would be about 4 or 5. And I'm going to just mince these up. I'm going to I took off the bottoms because they're not going to be really good texture wise. And then I'm just going to take off this last little bit of the top because once you pick a green onion, it starts to lose its liquid and then it dehydrates and it gets a bit more chewy and less flavor. So we're going to mince up our onions first. I'm going to throw in my lighter colored ones right now. That way they can kind of steep in there and let out their flavors versus my darker green bits of the green onions I'm going to save to the last minute. So you want the whiter ones to go in first to let out their flavor because they're a bit stronger. We're going to give it a nice stir here. Perfect. And then I'm going to actually take a quick taste of my broth because I want to make sure I have it all seasoned up before I add in my fresh herbs because it will be harder to tell what it needs. A pinch more black pepper. I always say, most of the time the salt is right on. If it's missing something, it's a little bit of black pepper. So I'm going to add maybe a 1/4 of a teaspoon more, just a little bit to really get that nice kind of kick, but not being spicy. Give it a nice stir. Beautiful. Okay, let's get these green onions minced up because we are almost done with lunch. So I'm just doing a really thin slice on these. There we go. I'm just kind of feeding it through. And now I'm just going to go over them one more time by placing my hand firmly down on my blade and I'm just kind of rocking it back and forth. This gives me a nice, really firm cut through the herbs. And I will say the more you kind of cut up your herb, the more flavor you bring it out versus if you kind of leave it whole. There we go. So we've got our lovely herbs all cut up right now. Let's see. Let's check on our grilled cheeses here. Beautiful. We're getting there. We're almost to it. Perfect. Just a little bit longer on each one. Okay. I'm going to throw in my green onions first. We've got our parsley, and we've got our fresh basil. So those are our fresh herbs that we're using today. Green onions, basil, and parsley. And I actually used Italian parsley. I used the flat parsley versus the curly one. I feel like they actually have the same flavor, so it's really whatever's on at the store that looks the best. Give these a nice stir, but you see how it gives a beautiful pop of green and has just a lovely flavor, like a brightness to our broth that's a little bit richer because it is a minestrone. And now I'm just going to turn my soup down to the lowest that I have. So it's just a very mild simmer because I don't want my herbs to overcook. Okay, let's do our last little flip here. And now I'm going to get out my plate and we're going to start serving things up. So let's get a plate. Let's get my little cauldron. And let's serve up lunch. Okay, so turn off my skillet over here. We made our ham and Swiss with a little bit of Dijon on our homemade sourdough bread. And now let me get a ladle out. Perfect. So this is our delicious minestrone soup. We'll put it right in here. Nice. And the broth on this is just perfect. And then what I love to do with minestrone soup to make it just a little bit nicer is a little bit of fresh Parmesan cheese. And if you have time to hand grate it, perfect. But sprinkle a little bit over, and that just gives you a nice little kick in there. But again, today we made our delicious minestrone soup using Italian sausage, bacon, beans, celery, onions, tomatoes, and then a lovely ham and Swiss on sourdough bread. And let's not forget our delicious muffins. These are our cranberry orange muffins that we made with our sourdough discard. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today. We had a lot of fun, especially since this was my first one back from vacation, my mini one. But again, thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, show you what I'm cooking for the family. I'm also trying to walk you through and teach you guys how to cook as well. Thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe.